should have seen it coming. The whisper that shattered my entire world came from the lips of a complete stranger at my father's funeral. She leaned in close as I stood there in my black dress, tears still fresh on my cheeks, and whispered 4 words that changed everything. "He wasn't your real dad. Tell me about it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next will show you how sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones keeping the biggest secrets." Now let me take you back to 6 months ago, when I was Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Chicago. I lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment on the north side, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Most people would describe me as quiet, maybe even a little too serious for my age. I spent most of my time at the hospital, working the night shift because that's when the kids needed someone the most. My colleagues often wondered why I never talked about dating or starting a family of my own. The truth was, my father Robert was really all the family I had left. He was 55, worked as a civil engineer, and we met for dinner every Sunday without fail. He had this way of making even the simplest meal feel special, asking about every patient I'd cared for that week, remembering their names and their stories. My mother died when I was 10. At least that's what I'd been told my entire life. Robert always said she had complications during childbirth, that she fought hard, but couldn't make it. He'd get this distant look in his eyes whenever I asked about her. And I learned early not to push. Some wounds, I thought, were too deep to keep reopening. Growing up, it was just Robert and me against the world. He taught me how to ride a bike, helped with homework, attended every school play and graduation. When I decided to become a nurse, he was my biggest supporter. "You have this gift, Sarah," he'd tell me. "You see people when they're most vulnerable, and you make them feel safe." That gift, if you could call it that, came from understanding what it felt like to lose someone important. Every time I walked into a hospital room and saw a scared child with worried parents, I saw myself at 10 years old, confused, and alone. The difference was, I could actually help them. My father was proud of the work I did, especially with the immigrant families who came to our unit. I'd learned Mandarin and Korean specifically, to communicate with parents who were navigating the scariest moments of their lives, in a language that wasn't their own. Robert always said my mother would have been proud of how compassionate I'd become. 6 months ago, my life felt predictable, maybe even a little boring. I worked, I visited my father, I went home to my quiet apartment. I had a small circle of friends from work, but no one I'd call truly close. My father was my best friend, my only real family, and honestly, that felt like enough. I thought I knew everything about Robert Chen. I thought our little family of 2 had no secrets, no hidden chapters. I thought the story of my life was simple. Devoted father raises daughter alone after tragic loss of wife and mother. I was wrong about everything. The morning that would change my life forever started like any other Tuesday. I was finishing up my shift at the hospital when my phone rang. It was 6:47 a.m., and I remember thinking it was too early for my father to be calling. Robert was an early riser, but he knew I worked nights and usually let me sleep until at least noon. But this wasn't Robert calling. The call was from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. A voice I didn't recognize told me that Robert Chen had been brought in after collapsing at his engineering firm. Heart attack. The words hit me like ice water, and suddenly I was 10 years old again, standing in a hospital hallway while strangers in white coats used medical terms I didn't understand. I drove to the hospital in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The only thing that gave my life real meaning was taking care of people, but I'd never imagined having to watch someone I loved fight for their life. Robert wasn't just my father. He was my anchor, my constant, the person who taught me that healing others could help heal yourself. When I was 10 and my mother died, or so I believed, Robert could have fallen apart. Instead, he channeled his grief into raising me. He learned to braid my hair by watching YouTube videos. He attended every parent-teacher conference, sometimes leaving work early to make sure he never missed one. When I cried about not having a mother to help me shop for my first bra, he took me himself, red-faced but determined to be everything I needed. That's when I first understood the power of caring for someone when they're vulnerable. Robert showed me that love wasn't just an emotion. It was a choice you made every single day. When I decided to become a nurse, it felt inevitable. I wanted to be for other families what I wished someone could have been for us during those dark months after losing my mother. Pediatric nursing chose me as much as I chose it. There's something about a scared child that cuts through all the noise in your head and forces you to be present. When a 5-year-old looks at you with complete trust, believing you can make the pain stop, you discover strength you didn't know you had. My specialty became working with immigrant families. I spent my free time learning Mandarin and Korean, driven by memories of Robert struggling with medical terminology when I was sick as a child. He spoke perfect English, but stress has a way of making even familiar words feel foreign. I watched him stumble over simple questions about my symptoms, saw the frustration in his eyes when he couldn't advocate for me the way he wanted to. Language became my bridge to families who felt lost in the medical system. When I could explain a procedure in Mandarin to worried parents, or when I taught a Korean grandmother how to help with her grandson's breathing treatments, I felt like I was honoring something important. Robert always said my mother would have been proud of my compassion, though he never shared much about who she actually was as a person. The few details I knew about my mother came in fragments, shared during quiet moments when Robert's guard was down. She was beautiful, he'd say. She loved to sing while she cooked. She wanted children more than anything in the world. She died bringing me into it, and that fact shaped every major decision I ever made. I chose medicine because I couldn't save her. I avoided serious relationships because I was terrified of causing someone the kind of pain Robert carried. I worked nights because the darkness felt appropriate somehow, like I was doing penance for a sin I'd committed just by being born. Robert never made me feel guilty about my mother's death, but children create their own mythology around tragedy. I decided early that if I couldn't bring her back, I could at least dedicate my life to saving other people's mothers, other people's children. Working at Children's Hospital meant I saw medical miracles and heartbreak in equal measure. The immigrant families I worked with reminded me of my own story, people trying to build new lives while carrying old wounds. When Mr. Park's 7-year-old daughter needed heart surgery, I spent 3 hours explaining the procedure in Korean, helping him understand that the doctors weren't taking risks with her life. They were saving it. These moments felt sacred to me. Every family I helped navigate their crisis was a small victory against the helplessness I'd felt as a child. Robert would listen to these stories during our Sunday dinners, nodding with pride as I described helping a Mandarin-speaking mother understand her baby's treatment plan, or teaching a Korean father how to advocate for his son's needs. "You have this gift," he'd tell me. The same words he'd been saying since I started nursing school. You see people when they're most vulnerable, and you make them feel safe. That's not something you can teach. That comes from understanding what it feels like to need that safety yourself. I thought I understood exactly what he meant. I thought my childhood had given me empathy that made me better at my job. I had no idea that everything I believed about my past, about the source of my compassion, was built on a lie that was about to crumble completely. It was Tuesday, March 15th, at 2:47 a.m., when everything changed. I was finishing my shift notes in the pediatric unit when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Northwestern Memorial Hospital, not a number I recognized. My stomach dropped immediately. Hospitals don't call hospitals in the middle of the night unless something terrible has happened. The voice on the other end was professional but gentle. "Miss Chen? This is Dr. Patricia Williams from Northwestern Memorial's emergency department. I'm calling about your father, Robert Chen. He's been admitted following a cardiac event at his workplace." My first instinct was to hang up and pretend this wasn't happening. Robert was only 55. He exercised regularly, ate well, had no family history of heart problems. But as a nurse, I knew better than most that heart attacks don't follow rule books. I threw my things into my bag and drove across Chicago in what felt like slow motion. The streets were empty except for a few late-night delivery trucks, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. This was different from rushing to help a patient's family. This was personal, and suddenly all my medical knowledge felt useless. When I arrived at Northwestern, the emergency department looked exactly like every other hospital I'd worked in, but it felt alien and frightening. I wasn't Sarah the pediatric nurse anymore. I was just Sarah, the daughter of a man who might be dying. Dr. Williams met me in the family waiting room. She was about 40, with tired eyes that had clearly delivered bad news before. "Your father collapsed at his engineering firm around midnight. His colleagues called 911 immediately. We've stabilized him, but he suffered significant damage to his heart muscle. Can I see him? My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Of course, but I should warn you, he's been in and out of consciousness. The medication can cause confusion, and he may not recognize you right away. Nothing could have prepared me for seeing Robert in that hospital bed. My father, who had always seemed so strong and reliable, looked fragile beneath the tangle of wires and monitors. His face was pale, and there was an oxygen cannula under his nose that made his breathing sound labored and artificial. I pulled a chair close to his bedside and took his hand. It felt cold and slightly damp. Dad? It's Sarah. I'm here. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then settling on my face. For a moment, I saw the recognition I was hoping for. But then something strange happened. His expression shifted to confusion, almost panic. Margaret, he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed earlier. Margaret, is that you? I thought you were gone. I felt my chest tighten. No, Dad, it's Sarah, your daughter. You're in the hospital, but you're going to be okay. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to focus. Sarah, he finally said, but there was something odd in his tone, like he was testing the name. My Sarah. I'm sorry, sweetheart. So sorry. Sorry for what? Dad, you don't need to apologize for anything. You're sick, but the doctors are taking good care of you. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I should have told you the truth. About Dr. Morrison. About the real mother. Oh God, Margaret, I'm so sorry about what we did. The words sent ice through my veins. Dad, who's Margaret? Who's Dr. Morrison? What are you talking about? But his eyes had already drifted closed again, and his breathing deepened as the pain medication pulled him back under. I sat there holding his hand, my mind racing. Robert had never mentioned anyone named Margaret. And what did he mean about the real mother? My mother died when I was 10. That was the story I'd grown up with. I tried to convince myself it was just the medication causing confusion, but something about the way he'd said those names felt too specific, too loaded with meaning to be random. Over the next hour, Robert drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time he spoke, he revealed fragments that made no sense. He mentioned a place called St. Mary's. He asked about someone named the little girl. Most disturbing, he kept apologizing for something I couldn't understand. The papers, he mumbled during one brief moment of consciousness. Check my jacket pocket. Tell Dr. Morrison. Tell him I kept my promise. I found Robert's jacket folded on a chair in the corner. In the inside pocket, I discovered something that made my hands shake. A business card so old the edges were yellow and soft. It read, Dr. Tom, James Morrison, Obstetrics and Gynecology, St. Mary's Hospital, with a Chicago address I didn't recognize. Underneath the card was a small piece of paper with a phone number written in Robert's handwriting, along with a single word, Margaret. My first instinct was to call the number immediately, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the nurse in me recognizing that this wasn't the time or place for whatever conversation that phone call might bring. Instead, I slipped the card and paper back into Robert's jacket and returned to his bedside. I realized I was probably about to lose the only family I'd ever known, and I had no idea there might be anyone else to call. The next 3 days passed in a blur of waiting rooms, medical consultations, and sleepless nights. I'd called in sick to Children's Hospital, something I'd never done before, but I couldn't bring myself to leave Robert's side. Every time I tried to go home to shower or rest, he'd wake up confused and frightened, calling out names I didn't recognize. My supervisor at Children's Hospital, Janet Morrison, called on Thursday morning. Sarah, I understand your father is ill, but we need you back. The pediatric unit is overwhelmed, and the Korean family in room 314 specifically asked for you. I can't leave him right now, Janet. He's not stable. Take the rest of the week, but we'll need to discuss your attendance record when you return. I hung up feeling like my professional life was crumbling, just as my personal world had been turned upside down. But Robert needed me, and nothing else seemed to matter. During his lucid moments, Robert would grip my hand with surprising strength and whisper fragments that made no sense. St. Mary's Hospital, he said on Thursday afternoon, his voice barely audible. Dr. Morrison delivered so many babies there. Good man. Kept his promises. Dad, what promises? Who is Dr. Morrison? The papers, he whispered, his eyes fluttering closed again. In the safe at home. Margaret's address. Tell her I tried to be enough. That evening, I drove to Robert's house for the first time since his heart attack. Walking through the front door felt strange, like I was intruding on someone else's life. Everything looked exactly the same. His reading glasses on the kitchen table, yesterday's newspaper folded next to his coffee cup. But somehow, it all felt foreign. Robert had mentioned a safe, but I'd never seen one. After searching his bedroom and office, I found it behind a family photo in his closet. The combination was my birthday, 0328. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. His will, insurance policies, and a manila envelope marked, Sarah, important. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was my birth certificate, but it wasn't the one I'd seen before. This version showed different information. Baby girl, mother unknown, father unknown, St. Mary's Hospital, Chicago, March 28, 1997. Below that was a handwritten letter on Dr. James Morrison's letterhead, dated March 30th, 1997. Robert, as we discussed, the infant was abandoned at St. Mary's on March 28th. The mother left no identifying information except a first name, Margaret. The baby appears healthy and is in need of immediate placement. Given your recent loss and your desire to help, I believe this could benefit both you and the child. I sat on Robert's bedroom floor, staring at words that rewrote my entire history. I wasn't Robert's biological daughter. I was an abandoned baby he'd adopted after his real wife died. Everything I believed about my mother, about my birth, about why I looked the way I did, had been a carefully constructed story. But there was more. At the bottom of the envelope was a recent letter, dated just 2 months ago, also from Dr. Morrison. Robert, the woman who inquired about the baby from 1997 has contacted me again. She's provided more information this time and seems genuinely interested in making contact. Her name is Margaret Westfield. I've included her current address, but the decision to reach out is entirely yours. Attached was a piece of paper with an address in Evanston and a phone number. Margaret Westfield, the name Robert had whispered in his delirium. I drove back to the hospital with the documents, my mind racing. When I arrived, Robert was awake and seemed more alert than he'd been in days. Sarah, he said, his voice clearer. You found them, didn't you? I sat beside his bed and placed the papers where he could see them. Why didn't you tell me? Tears filled his eyes. Because I wanted you to be mine. Really mine. When Helen died, I thought my life was over. Then Dr. Morrison called about this baby who needed a family, and it felt like fate. You were so small, so perfect. I looked at you and knew I'd do anything to protect you. But my mother, Margaret, she might have wanted me back someday. She was 15, Sarah. Her parents forced her to give you up. Dr. Morrison said she was devastated, but they threatened to disown her if she kept you. I thought if I could give you a good life, it would be enough. For the first time, I understood why Robert had always seemed to love me with such desperate intensity. I wasn't just his daughter. I was his second chance at happiness, his purpose after losing everything. I'm sorry I lied, he whispered. I was going to tell you when you turned 30. I had it all planned. But then this happened, and I realized I might run out of time. I squeezed his hand. You didn't lie, Dad. You gave me a family when I didn't have one. That's not a lie. That's love. But even as I said it, I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret Westfield, and whether somewhere in Chicago, a woman had been wondering about her daughter for 28 years. Robert's condition deteriorated rapidly over the weekend. The doctors explained that his heart had sustained more damage than they initially thought, and by Sunday evening, they were discussing comfort care instead of aggressive treatment. I spent every moment by his bedside, watching the monitors that showed his weakening vital signs. My supervisor Janet called again Monday morning, her tone sharper than before. Sarah, I understand this is difficult, but you've missed 5 straight days. If you don't return by Wednesday, I'll have no choice but to begin disciplinary procedures. My father is dying, I said, my voice hollow. "I'm sorry, but the hospital has policies. You've used all your personal days, and we can't hold your position indefinitely." I hung up and realized I was probably about to lose my job on top of everything else. The career I'd built, the identity I'd crafted as a caring pediatric nurse, might disappear just when I was discovering that my entire personal identity had been built on lies. Robert was awake when I returned to his room, but his breathing was labored, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that I recognized from too many years in healthcare. "Sarah," he whispered, gripping my hand with what little strength he had left. "Did you find Dr. Morrison's number?" "Yes, Dad, but let's not worry about that now." "No, listen to me. Call him. He needs to know I kept my promise. And Margaret, she deserves to know what happened to you." "What promise? What are you talking about?" But Robert's eyes were already closing again, and his grip on my hand loosened. For a terrifying moment I thought he was gone, but the monitors showed he was still fighting. Dr. Williams found me crying in the hallway outside Robert's room that afternoon. "Miss Chen, I think it's time we talked about your father's wishes regarding end-of-life care." He never talked about that with me. Actually, he did complete an advance directive when he was admitted. He doesn't want any extraordinary measures. He wants to be comfortable, and he wants you to know that he's grateful for the life you gave him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert was grateful for the life I gave him, when he'd literally given me life by taking me in as an abandoned baby. That night, I finally worked up the courage to call Dr. Morrison. The number on the business card was decades old, but directory assistants gave me a current listing. My hand shook as I dialed. "Dr. Morrison?" I said, when an elderly man answered. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I think you knew my father, Robert Chen, and maybe you delivered me 28 years ago." There was a long silence. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been wondering about you for so many years. Is Robert all right? He's dying. He's in Northwestern Memorial, and he keeps saying he made you a promise. Oh, my dear child. I need to see you. Can you meet me at the hospital tomorrow morning?" That conversation haunted me through the night. I sat beside Robert's bed, holding his cold hand and trying to process that my entire life story was about to change again. By morning, his condition had worsened significantly, and the doctors suggested we might only have hours left. Dr. Morrison arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. He was a distinguished black man in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that immediately put me at ease despite the circumstances. "Your father is a good man," he said, sitting beside me in the family lounge. "When I called him 28 years ago about a baby girl who needed a home, I had no idea I was creating such a beautiful family. Tell me about my mother, about Margaret." Dr. Morrison sighed deeply. "Margaret Westfield was 15 when she gave birth to you. Her parents were wealthy, respected members of their church community, and they refused to let her keep you. They told her she was too young, that a baby would ruin her life and theirs. But she wanted to keep me. She fought them for weeks. I've delivered thousands of babies, Sarah, but I've never forgotten the look on that young girl's face when she had to say goodbye to you. Her parents essentially forced her to sign the relinquishment papers." My chest felt tight. And Robert just happened to be available? Robert had just lost his wife Helen to cancer. They'd been trying to have children for years without success, and he was devastated. When I called him about a baby girl who needed immediate placement, he saw it as a gift from God. Did Margaret ever try to find me? Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. She's contacted me several times over the years. The first time was when she turned 18 and realized she might have legal options. But by then, Robert was your legal father, and Margaret had no parental rights. She tried again? 3 more times. Once when she graduated college, once when she got married, and most recently, about 2 months ago. Her own daughter is grown now, and she said she needed to know what happened to her first child. I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. She has other children? She married when she was 22 and had 2 daughters, but she never stopped thinking about you. At that moment, Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway. "Miss Chen, you should come quickly. Your father is asking for you." We rushed to Robert's room, where he was conscious but clearly struggling. When he saw Dr. Morrison, tears began flowing down his cheeks. "James," he whispered, You came. I kept my word, Robert. Sarah is a beautiful woman, and you've been an incredible father. Robert looked at me with eyes full of love and regret. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth sooner, but I want you to know that being your dad has been the greatest honor of my life. You are my dad, I said, tears streaming down my face. Biology doesn't change that. Find Margaret, he whispered. She deserves to know what an amazing woman her daughter became. Those were the last words Robert ever spoke to me. He died peacefully an hour later, leaving me alone with questions I'd never thought to ask, and a woman named Margaret, who might be my only remaining family. The funeral planning happened in a blur. Dr. Morrison stayed with me through Robert's final hours and helped me make arrangements at Graceland Cemetery. I felt completely lost. I'd never planned a funeral before, and I couldn't stop thinking about whether I should try to contact Margaret before saying goodbye to the only father I'd ever known. She should know, Dr. Morrison said as we sat in the funeral home's family room. Margaret has been carrying the weight of wondering about you for 28 years. Robert's death might actually give you both a chance to finally meet. But what if she doesn't want to see me? What if learning about Robert's death just brings up painful memories? Sarah, I delivered you. I watched Margaret hold you for 3 hours before her parents forced her to sign those papers. I've seen thousands of mothers say goodbye to their babies, but I've never forgotten the look in her eyes. She needs to know you're okay. I stared at Margaret's address, which Dr. Morrison had written on a piece of hospital stationery. Margaret Westfield, 1247. Oak Street, Evanston, Illinois. Somehow, my biological mother lived less than 30 miles from where I'd grown up. Did you ever tell her about Robert? About where I went? Dr. Morrison shook his head. Adoption records were sealed back then. I couldn't share information about adoptive families even when birth mothers asked. All I could tell Margaret was that her baby had been placed with a loving family. That evening, I drove to Margaret's address. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see where she lived, to make the abstract idea of my birth mother into something real. The house was a beautiful Victorian with a well-maintained garden and a silver Honda in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see warm light and the silhouettes of people moving around inside. I sat in my car for almost an hour, working up the courage to knock on the door. Finally, I drove home without making contact. Robert's funeral was in 2 days, and I couldn't handle any more emotional upheaval before saying goodbye to him. The funeral service was small. Just a few of Robert's colleagues from the engineering firm, some neighbors, Dr. Morrison, and me. I'd written a eulogy about the man who taught me that love wasn't about biology, but about showing up every day and choosing to care for someone. As I spoke about Robert's dedication and kindness, I noticed a woman in the back of the chapel who I didn't recognize. She was probably in her 40s, with dark hair and features that looked strangely familiar. She wore a simple black dress and sat alone, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. During the entire service, she kept staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. After the service, as people were filing out to go to the cemetery, the woman approached me slowly. Up close, I could see that she had the same shape eyes as me, the same widow's peak hairline. "Sarah?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes? I'm Margaret Westfield." That's when my world changed forever. I stared at her, speechless. This woman, my biological mother, had somehow found out about Robert's funeral and come to pay her respects to the man who raised her daughter. "How did you know?" I finally managed to ask. "Dr. Morrison called me yesterday. He said Robert had passed away, and that you might need family. I hope it's okay that I came. I know this isn't the time or place, but I couldn't let you go through this alone." The cemetery service was a blur. Margaret stood beside me as we lowered Robert's casket into the ground, and I found myself grateful for her presence, even though I didn't understand it yet. When the service ended, most people offered their condolences and left, but Margaret lingered. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" she asked as we walked back to our cars. "I have so many things I want to tell you about that day you were born, and about why I've been thinking about you every day for 28 years. "I don't understand," I said. "Dr. Morrison told me your parents forced you to give me up. Why would you want to see me now?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was 15 years old and scared. And I let other people make the most important decision of my life. I've regretted it every single day since. She reached into her purse and pulled out a faded Polaroid photograph. I took this the day you were born, before they made me sign the papers. I've carried it with me everywhere for 28 years. The photo showed a tiny baby, me, sleeping in a hospital bassinet. On the back, someone had written in teenage handwriting, "Sarah Rose, March 28th, 1997. I will find you someday. Love, Mama." Looking at that photo, I realized that Robert wasn't the only one who had been loving me my entire life. Somewhere in Chicago, a woman I'd never met had been carrying my baby picture and hoping for the chance to tell me she was sorry. "I named you Sarah," Margaret said softly. "I chose Rose as your middle name because I wanted something beautiful for you to remember me by, even if we never met." "Robert kept the name Sarah," I whispered. "He told me he chose it because it meant princess, and I was his little princess." Margaret smiled through her tears. "He sounds like a wonderful father. I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm so grateful that you found someone who loved you the way you deserved to be loved." Standing in that cemetery, holding a photograph I'd never seen before, I understood that Robert's death hadn't just ended one chapter of my life. It had opened another one I didn't even know existed. For the first time in 28 years, I was face to face with the woman who gave birth to me, and instead of anger or confusion, all I felt was a strange sense of completeness. "Yes," I said finally. "I'd like to get coffee. I have a lot of questions." Margaret nodded, wiping her eyes. "I have a lot of answers, and Sarah, I want you to know that giving you up was the biggest mistake of my life, but seeing you now, seeing the incredible woman you've become, maybe it wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe it was exactly what was supposed to happen." Over the next few months, Margaret and I began the delicate process of building a relationship. We met for coffee every Tuesday afternoon at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, halfway between her home in Evanston and my apartment in Chicago. Those first meetings were awkward and emotional, filled with 28 years of questions and careful explanations. Margaret told me about her life after I was born, how she'd finished high school, gone to college, and become a teacher, how she'd married David Westfield when she was 22 and had 2 daughters, Emma, now 23, and Claire, 21, how she'd never told her family about me, carrying the secret like a weight that never lifted. "Every birthday," she said during our third meeting, "I would wonder what you looked like, whether you were happy, if you liked school. When Emma and Claire were babies, I would hold them and think about how I only got 3 hours with you." I learned that Margaret had tried to find me when she turned 18, but the adoption records were sealed. She'd contacted Dr. Morrison several times over the years, hoping for any information about my well-being, but he could only tell her that I'd been placed with a loving family. The hardest part, Margaret admitted, was not knowing if I'd made the right choice. My parents convinced me that giving you up was best for everyone, but I spent 28 years wondering if that was true. Meanwhile, my own life was changing in ways I hadn't expected. When I returned to work at Children's Hospital, Janet was surprisingly understanding about my extended absence. But more than that, my experience with Margaret made me realize how many families in our pediatric unit were dealing with similar complicated histories. I started paying closer attention to the adopted children who came through our department, and to the immigrant families who reminded me of my own complicated background. During one particularly difficult night shift, I was caring for a 7-year-old Korean girl named Soo Jin, whose adoptive parents spoke no Korean, while her biological grandmother had flown in from Seoul but spoke no English. Watching the family struggle to communicate about Soo Jin's medical needs reminded me of my own story. I spent 3 hours that night translating between the grandmother, the adoptive parents, and the medical team, helping them understand that they were all on the same side. They all loved Soo Jin and wanted her to get better. After that night, I approached Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the head of pediatrics, with an idea. What if we created a family liaison program? Something specifically designed to help families with complex backgrounds navigate medical situations? Dr. Martinez was intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking about adoptive families, immigrant families, families dealing with language barriers or cultural differences. A lot of our patients come from situations where the adults in their lives don't share the same background or experience. Sometimes that creates communication problems that affect patient care. Over the following weeks, I developed a proposal for what I called the Family Bridge Program. The idea was to train specific nurses to work with families whose situations didn't fit traditional models. We would focus on adoption cases, international families, and situations where cultural or language differences made medical communication challenging. The proposal faced some resistance from hospital administration. "We already have interpreters," said James Peterson, the assistant administrator, "and our social workers handle complicated family situations." "But this is different," I explained. "This is about recognizing that some families need extra support, not because something is wrong, but because their family structure is more complex than average. An adopted child might have medical history gaps that affect treatment. Immigrant parents might not understand that asking questions is encouraged here, even if it wasn't in their home country." Margaret became an unexpected ally in developing the program. As a teacher, she understood how institutional systems often failed children from non-traditional backgrounds. "In schools," she told me, "we see this all the time. The kids who struggle aren't necessarily the ones with problems at home. They're often the ones whose families don't match what the school expects a family to look like." Getting approval for the Family Bridge program took months of meetings, presentations, and revisions. Some staff members worried we were creating unnecessary bureaucracy. Others questioned whether we were the right hospital to pioneer this kind of approach. But I persisted, and eventually Dr. Martinez became a strong supporter. "Sarah's personal experience gives her insights that could benefit hundreds of families," she argued to the hospital board. "This isn't just about good intentions. This is about improving patient outcomes by recognizing that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to family dynamics." The program officially launched in September, 6 months after Robert's death. I was promoted to senior pediatric nurse and given responsibility for training other staff members in what we called family-centered cultural competency. Our first success story was a 9-year-old boy named Miguel, whose adoptive parents had been told he was non-compliant with diabetes management. Through the Family Bridge program, we discovered that Miguel's birth parents had told him that being diabetic meant he was broken, and he'd been hiding his symptoms to avoid disappointing his new family. Working with both sets of parents and a translator, we helped Miguel understand that diabetes was a medical condition he could manage, not a character flaw. Within a month, his glucose levels stabilized, and his adoptive parents felt more confident about communicating with him about his health. Margaret often visited the hospital to see the program in action. Watching her interact with the families we served, I realized that our relationship had given both of us something we'd been missing. She got to see the woman her daughter had become, and I got to understand where my instinct for helping complicated families had come from. "You're doing something Robert would be proud of," she told me one evening, as we watched a Korean grandmother successfully communicate with her grandson's adoptive parents using a combination of translation and gestures. "You're turning your own experience into something that helps other people." But even as the program succeeded, building a relationship with Margaret presented new challenges. Her daughters, Emma and Claire, struggled to accept that they had a sister they'd never known about. David, Margaret's husband, was supportive but cautious about how to integrate me into their family traditions. "It's not that we don't want you here," Emma told me during a particularly tense family dinner in November. "It's just that we don't know how to make room for 28 years of missing history." She was right. And I realized that claiming my place in Margaret's family meant accepting that it would change all of their relationships with each other. I wasn't just Margaret's lost daughter. I was Emma and Claire's half-sister, David's stepdaughter, and grandmother to grandparents who had never known I existed. The learning curve was steep for everyone. 6 months later, I stood in the Children's Hospital auditorium, accepting the Excellence in Pediatric Care Award for developing the Family Bridge program. The program had already helped over 200 families navigate complex medical situations, and hospitals in 3 other states had requested consultation on implementing similar programs. Margaret was in the audience that night, sitting next to Emma and Claire, who had slowly begun accepting me as their sister. It had taken months of awkward family dinners and careful conversations, but we were learning how to make room for 28 years of missing history. As I stood at the podium, I thought about Robert and how proud he would be to see what had grown from the foundation he'd given me. The Family Bridge program wasn't just about medical care. It was about recognizing that families come in all forms, And sometimes the most beautiful relationships are the ones that don't follow traditional patterns. When I was growing up, I told the audience, my father taught me that love isn't about biology. It's about showing up every day and choosing to care for someone. The families we serve through this program prove that truth every single day. After the ceremony, Dr. Martinez approached me with news that would change everything again. Sarah, I've been talking with the board about expanding the Family Bridge program. We want to offer you the position of Director of Family Services, overseeing programs at all 3 of our hospital locations. The promotion would mean more responsibility, a significant salary increase, and the opportunity to help thousands of families each year. It would also mean honoring Robert's memory by turning my personal experience into something that could benefit others. That same week, Margaret and I established the Robert Chen Foundation for Adoptive Family Support. Using money from Robert's life insurance policy, we created a fund to help families dealing with complex adoption situations, providing resources for medical history gaps, legal support, and counseling services. Robert saved your life when you were 3 days old, Margaret said as we signed the foundation paperwork. Now we're going to help him save other families too. The first family we helped was the Park family, Mr. Park, whose daughter I'd helped during her heart surgery. They were struggling with legal issues related to international adoption, and our foundation was able to connect them with attorneys who specialized in their situation. Our second case was a teenage girl named Lisa, who had been placed with a new family after aging out of foster care. She was having medical issues that her adoptive parents couldn't afford to address, and her birth parents were unable to provide medical history. Through the foundation, we helped cover her medical expenses and connected her with resources for young adults navigating complex family situations. By the end of the year, the Robert Chen Foundation had helped 47 families and was partnering with adoption agencies throughout the Midwest. Every success story felt like keeping a promise to Robert that his choice to take in an abandoned baby would continue to create positive change long after he was gone. Margaret and I also finally told Emma and Claire the full story of how we'd found each other. Claire, who was studying social work at Northwestern University, decided to write her senior thesis on family reunification in adoption cases. Emma, who had initially been the most resistant to accepting me, surprised everyone by volunteering with the foundation during her summer break. I understand now, Emma told me during one of our monthly family dinners. You're not trying to replace the relationship Mom had with us. You're just adding something new to our family that wasn't there before. The most meaningful moment came 8 months after Robert's death, when Dr. Morrison called to tell me about another family situation. There's a young woman in our maternity ward, he said. She's 17, and her parents want her to give up the baby. She asked me if I knew anyone who could tell her what it's like to be adopted, and what it's like to be the mother who gives a child up. Margaret and I met with the young woman, whose name was Jessica, and her parents. Over the course of several hours, we shared our stories. The pain, the regret, the love, and ultimately the healing that had brought us together after 28 years. Jessica decided to keep her baby, and her parents, after hearing our story, agreed to support her decision. 6 months later, she sent us a photo of her healthy baby boy with a note that read, "Thank you for showing me that every family story is different and that love finds a way." Today, the Family Bridge program operates in 12 hospitals across 4 states. The Robert Chen Foundation has helped over 300 families, and Margaret and I have a relationship that honors both the love Robert gave me and the love she never stopped feeling. I still work night shifts at Children's Hospital, because that's when families need the most support. But now I know that my gift for helping others came from understanding that family isn't defined by biology or law. It's defined by the willingness to show up, to love without conditions, and to believe that every person deserves to belong somewhere. The stranger at my father's funeral gave me the greatest gift imaginable, the truth about unconditional love. Robert wasn't my biological father, but he was my dad in every way that mattered. Margaret wasn't able to raise me, but she never stopped being my mother. Family isn't about where you come from. It's about the people who choose to love you and the people you choose to love back. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories about the power of family, love, and second chances. And tell me in the comments below, what does family mean to you?